He said he didn't want a baby girl. 2 years later, he saw her with triplets and couldn't move. Family, I need you here, right now, because what I'm about to show you proves that money can't buy decency, and some men will do anything to protect their image, even if it means erasing the people who love them. Before we start, tell me this. If someone tried to erase you, would you walk away or would you fight back? Drop, walk, or fight in the comments. I need to know you're with me. Every like on this story is a prayer for every woman who's been told she's a problem. We're aiming for 50,000, not for the algorithm, but because your support becomes someone else's strength. Let's make that number climb. Now, let me take you somewhere most people never see. The penthouse office sits 47 floors above 10th Street, New York. Floor-to-ceiling glass. Manhattan stretched out like conquered territory. The kind of view that reminds you every single day that some people live above the rest of the world, and they like it that way. Zuri Kade stood in the center of that room, hands steady at her sides, rehearsing words she'd practiced for 3 days. She wore a simple navy dress. No QUIETWEALTH. Hair pulled back. She wanted to look strong, not desperate. She needed him to see her, not a problem to solve. Cassian Roe sat behind his desk. Custom walnut, probably cost more than most people's cars, typing something that clearly mattered more than her presence. He didn't look up when she entered, didn't smile, didn't ask how she was feeling. He just kept typing. Zuri's throat tightened. She'd expected coldness. Cassian had mastered that long ago. But this felt different. It felt like preparation. Cassian, she said quietly, I need to tell you something. He stopped typing, leaned back in his chair. The leather creaked, a sound that filled the silence like a warning. Go ahead. No words. No concern. Just permission to speak, like she was an employee requesting time off. Zuri inhaled slowly. I'm pregnant. The air in the room shifted. Cassian's face didn't move, but his eyes did, sharp, calculating, running through scenarios faster than she could track. Then he opened a drawer, pulled out a checkbook, uncapped a pen with one smooth motion, like he'd done this before. Maybe he had. He wrote, tore the check free, slid across the glass desk. It landed between them like a verdict. That should cover it, Cassian said. His tone was business casual, detached. There's a clinic I've worked with before. Discreet, professional. They'll handle everything. Afterward, we'll arrange relocation if you'd prefer. A fresh start somewhere quieter. Zuri stared at the check. The number didn't register. Her vision blurred at the edges. Cassian, what are you saying? He met her eyes. No apology. No hosetastion. I don't want a baby girl. Get rid of it. The words hit like glass shattering. Zuri's chest tightened. Her hands went cold. The room, the view, the desk, the man she thought she knew, suddenly felt like a trap she'd walked into willingly. You don't even know if it's a girl. Doesn't matter. Cassian's voice didn't waver. I'm not doing this. Not now. Not with the board watching. Not with investors circling. A scandal like this could derail everything I've built. Gang down. Zuri's voice cracked. This is your child. She thought she was carrying one life. The truth was about to triple the stakes. The clinic was small, clean, the kind of place designed to make you feel safe while your world unravels. Zuri sat on the examination table, paper crinkling beneath her, hands folded tight in her lap. She'd been here for 20 minutes. The nurse had smiled. The receptionist had been kind. Everything felt normal. Until Dr. Lena Sato walked in holding a tablet, her expression carefully neutral. Good morning, Zuri. Dr. Sato's voice was warm but measured. She sat down on a rolling stool, set the tablet on her lap, and folded her hands the same way Zuri had. Mirroring. Preparing. Morning, Zuri replied quietly. I've reviewed your ultrasound. Dr. Sato paused, glanced at the screen, then back at Zuri. There's something we need to discuss. Zuri's stomach dropped. Her first thought was immediate and brutal. Something's wrong. Is the baby okay? Dr. Sato nodded quickly. The babies are healthy. Zuri blinked, replayed the sentence, waited for it to make sense. The what? Dr. Sato turned the tablet toward her. 3 small shapes glowed on the screen, each with a faint, rapid flutter at the center. You're carrying triplets. The room tilted. Zuri stared at the screen. 1 heartbeat. 2. 3. Repeating. Steady. Real. That's not possible. It's rare, Dr. Sato said gently, but it happens. Spontaneous triplets. No fertility treatments. No genetic history required. You're about 8 weeks along. Zuri's hands went to her stomach. Flat. Ordinary. Hiding 3 lives she hadn't prepared for. Kess listened without interrupting. When Zuri finished, Kess sat back, exhaled through her nose, and said 4 words. We're getting you out. Out of what? His reach, Kess said flatly. You think a man like that stops at a check and a warning? He's got people, money, lawyers. You stay visible. He'll find a way to make you disappear, quietly, legally, or otherwise. Zuri's stomach twisted. She'd been so focused on refusing Cassian's offer that she hadn't thought about what came next. What do I do? Kess started the car. You move. You change your number. You don't tell anyone where you're going. And you let me handle the rest. Kess, you're not doing this alone, Z. Not anymore. That night, Zuri packed 1 bag. Clothes. Documents. A photo of her mother she kept in a drawer. Kess showed up with a burner phone, a list of safe addresses, and a plan that felt both paranoid and necessary. Zuri locked her apartment door for the last time and descended the stairs quietly, bag slung over her shoulder, heartbeat loud in her ears. At the bottom of the stairwell, she stopped. A black SUV sat parked across the street. Engine off. Windows tinted. Someone inside. Kess noticed it too. Back door. Now. They slipped through the alley, climbed into Kess's car 2 blocks over, and drove in silence for 20 minutes before either of them spoke. Zuri's voice was barely a whisper. He sent someone. Yeah, Kess said grimly. He did. Later that week, a courier knocked on Zuri's old apartment. The landlord accepted the envelope. Inside, a polite letter asking Zuri to reconsider her options and a business card for a private law firm. The landlord forwarded it to Zuri's old email. She never opened it. But 2 nights later, lying awake on Kess's couch, Zuri heard footsteps in the hallway outside the apartment. Slow, deliberate, stopping right outside the door. Then silence. Zuri held her breath, listened, waited. The footsteps moved on. But Zuri didn't sleep that night. And in the morning, she made a vow. They don't get to touch my children. When you run from power, you don't just change addresses. You change everything. Zuri disappeared the way ghosts do. Slowly, then completely. First, the phone. Kess handed her a prepaid burner with 10 contacts max. No social media. No email trails. No digital breadcrumbs. Then the addresses. Zuri moved every 6 weeks. Kess's couch. A friend's spare room. A sublet with no lease. She learned to pack light, sleep light, live light. She worked cash jobs, cleaning offices at night, stocking shelves before dawn, waitressing under a manager who didn't ask questions. She hid her growing belly under loose shirts and kept her head down. Some nights, exhaustion pulled her under before she finished her shift. Other nights, she lay awake feeling 3 tiny heartbeats flutter against her ribs, reminding her why she couldn't stop. Kess visited when she could, always bringing groceries and prenatal vitamins Zuri couldn't afford. She never said it out loud, but Zuri knew. Kess was spending money she didn't have to keep them safe. "You don't have to do this," Zuri said one night, voice thick with guilt. Kess just shrugged. Family doesn't run a tab. But while Zuri built her new life in shadows, Cassian Roe was building walls around his reputation. 47 floors above 10th Street, he sat in boardrooms and smiled at investors and signed contracts worth millions. He attended galas, shook hands, gave speeches about innovation and legacy. No one asked about Zuri. No one knew she existed. But late at night, alone in his penthouse, Cassian stared at his phone and wondered if the problem had been solved, or if it was still out there, waiting to surface. He told himself he'd been practical, responsible. He'd offered a solution. She'd refused. That made it her choice, not his cruelty. He almost believed it. Then Silas Kane made his first move. Silas was the kind of man who didn't appear in photographs. No social media. No public record. Just a name whispered in expensive offices when someone needed a problem handled quietly. Cassian had used him twice before. Once for a journalist digging into offshore accounts. Once for a former partner threatening a lawsuit. Both problems disappeared. So when Cassian called Silas and said, "I need you to locate someone," Silas didn't ask why. He just said, "How soon?" Zuri felt it before she saw it. A shift in the air, a sense that the space around her had eyes. First, it was small things. A phone call that disconnected the moment she answered. A black sedan parked outside her current sublet 3 days in a row. A landlord who suddenly needed her lease signed in person, then changed his mind and said it could wait. Then the pressure increased. Her waitressing job ended abruptly. The manager claimed budget cuts. But when Zuri returned the next week to pick up her last check, the new hire looked exactly like her. Same age, same build, same shift. Her landlord raised the rent without warning. When Zuri asked why, he stammered something about property taxes and avoided eye contact. Kess noticed it too. "Someone's pushing," Kess said one night, pacing the tiny kitchen of Zuri's current place. "Jobs don't vanish like that. Rent doesn't spike overnight unless someone's applying pressure." Zuri wrapped her arms around her belly, now visibly swollen, impossible to hide. "What do I do?" "You keep moving. You stay unpredictable, and you don't let him know you're scared." "I'm scared." Kess stopped pacing, looked at her cousin, exhausted, pregnant, hunted, and said the only thing that mattered. "Then be scared and move anyway." 2 weeks later, Dr. Sato called. Zuri had missed her last 2 appointments. Money was tight. Transportation was complicated. She'd planned to reschedule. But Dr. Sato's voice was firm. "Zuri, I need you to come in. Today, if possible. Is something wrong? Your blood pressure's been climbing. Stress can trigger complications with multiples. If it gets worse, we're looking at early labor or worse." Zuri's hands went cold. "How much worse?" Dr. Sato paused. "You could lose them, Zuri. All 3. The words landed like a fist to the chest. "I'll be there tomorrow," Zuri whispered. She hung up, sat on the edge of the bed, stared at nothing. Cassian Roe was still hunting her. and the hunt was killing her babies. Would you keep running, or would you stand and fight? Some victories arrive wrapped in pain, but there's still victories. The contraction started 3 weeks early. Zuri woke at 2 a.m. to a sharp, twisting pain low in her abdomen. She lay still for a moment, hoping it was nothing, hoping it would pass. It didn't. The second contraction hit 5 minutes later. Harder, longer. Zuri reached for her phone with shaking hands and texted Kess one word. Now. Kess arrived in 12 minutes. She burst through the door, took one look at Zuri bent over the couch, and grabbed her bag. Hospital. Let's go. The drive was a blur. Red lights. Sharp turns. Kess's hand gripping hers while Zuri breathed through waves of pain that felt like her body was being torn apart from the inside. By the time they reached the emergency entrance, Zuri couldn't walk. Kess flagged down a nurse, and within seconds, Zuri was in a wheelchair, being rushed through sterile hallways that smelled like disinfectant and fear. Dr. Sato was already waiting in the delivery room, scrubbed and steady. Zuri, listen to me. Dr. Sato's voice cut through the chaos. You're at 37 weeks. That's full term for triplets. We can do this. But I need you to trust me and breathe. Zuri nodded, tears streaming down her face, hands gripping the rails of the hospital bed. Kess stood beside her, holding her hand, whispering the same words over and over. You've got this. You got this. You've got this. The first baby arrived at 4:47 a.m. A girl, small but fierce, lungs screaming the moment she entered the world. Dr. Sato placed her on Zuri's chest for one brief, perfect second before whisking her away to be checked. The second baby came 8 minutes later. Another girl, quieter, eyes blinking open slowly, taking in the bright lights and strange sounds with cautious curiosity. The third baby took longer. Complications. The monitors beeped faster. Dr. Sato's voice sharpened. Nurses moved quickly, hands sure, faces focused. Zuri couldn't see, couldn't hear clearly. The pain blurred into fear, and fear blurred into prayer. Please, please, please. And then a cry. The third baby. A boy, smaller than his sisters, but breathing. Fighting. Dr. Sato smiled for the first time all night. He's okay. They're all okay. Zuri collapsed back against the pillow, sobbing with relief, so overwhelming it felt like drowning in reverse. 2 hours later, Zuri sat in a quiet recovery room, 3 tiny bundles swaddled and sleeping in the bassinet beside her bed. She studied their faces. The slope of their noses, the curve of their ears, the way their fingers curled into small, determined fists. They were hers, completely, undeniably. Kess sat in the chair beside her, exhausted but grinning. You did it, Z. Zuri reached out and touched the smallest baby's hand. He wrapped his fingers around hers instinctively, holding on like he already knew she was his anchor. We did it, Zuri whispered. She made a promise then, to herself, to them. No one will ever make you feel unwanted. No one will ever try to erase you. And no one will ever take you from me. But the storm wasn't over. The next morning, a hospital administrator knocked on Zuri's door. She was young, professional, holding a clipboard. Ms. Kade, I just need to confirm some information for the birth certificates. Zuri nodded, half asleep, still recovering. The administrator asked standard questions. Names, birth dates, mother's information. Then she paused. And the father's information? Zuri's chest tightened. Not listed. The administrator frowned. Are you sure? It's recommended for legal. I'm sure. The woman hesitated, then made a note. But something in her expression shifted. A flicker of discomfort. Is there a problem? Zuri asked. No problem. The administrator smiled quickly. Too quickly. I'll get these processed. She left. Zuri stared at the closed door. That afternoon, a delivery arrived. No return address. No card. Just a small gift basket. Expensive baby clothes, organic blankets, a handwritten note that said, "Congratulations on your new arrivals." Zuri's blood ran cold. Kess saw it, grabbed the basket, threw it in the trash. He knows. Zuri nodded slowly, staring at her sleeping children. Yeah, she whispered. He knows. And that night, a nurse mentioned in passing that someone had called earlier, asking about a patient named Zuri Kade. Did you tell them anything? Kess asked sharply. The nurse looked confused. No, of course not. Patient privacy. But it was odd. The man sounded very insistent. Said he was confirming details for insurance purposes. Zuri and Kess exchanged a look. Cassian Roe wasn't letting go. And now, he knew exactly where she was. If you were Zuri, would you trust anyone ever again? Some people rebuild in silence. And when they return, the world doesn't recognize them. 2 years can feel like 20 when you're building a life from rubble. Zuri Kade stood in her small apartment. 2 bedrooms, clean, modest, hers, watching her triplets chase each other around the living room. They were 2 now, walking, talking, laughing. 3 distinct personalities wrapped in matching curls and mischief. The oldest girl, bold, loud, fearless, climbed onto the couch and declared herself queen. The second girl, thoughtful, quiet, observant, sat with a picture book, turning pages carefully, studying every illustration. The boy, small but determined, followed his sisters everywhere, mimicking their movements, refusing to be left behind. Zuri watched them and felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time. Pride. She'd rebuilt. Slowly. Painfully. After the hospital, Kess had helped her find a safer apartment in a different borough. Zuri had enrolled in night classes, finished a certification program, and landed steady freelance work managing social media for small businesses. It wasn't glamorous, but it was hers. No one from her old life knew where she was. No one asked questions. Zuri paid rent on time, kept to herself, and raised her children with a fierceness that came from knowing how close she'd come to losing them. She hadn't heard from Cassian Roe in 2 years. She'd started to believe he'd moved on. She was wrong. The opportunity came through email. A marketing firm near 10th Street was looking for a freelance consultant. Short-term contract, good pay, flexible hours. Zuri almost deleted it. The address made her stomach twist. Too close to Cassian's world. Too close to the penthouse where everything had shattered. But the pay was triple what she usually made. And the contract was only 6 weeks. She called Kess. Don't do it, Kess said immediately. That city remembers. And you don't know who's watching. It's been 2 years. Men like him don't forget. Z. They just wait. Zuri looked at her children, at the apartment she'd worked so hard to keep, at the life she'd built from nothing. I need this job, Kess. Kess was silent for a long moment. Then she sighed. Fine, but you stay alert, and you keep your distance. Zuri took the job. The first week was easy. She worked remotely, sent reports via email, avoided the office. But the second week required an in-person meeting. Just one afternoon, they said. Just a quick project review. Zuri dressed carefully. Professional. Forgettable. She pulled her hair back, wore minimal makeup, and left early to avoid traffic. She brought the triplets with her. Kess had offered to babysit, but Zuri refused. She didn't want them out of her sight. After the meeting, Zuri walked them through a nearby park. The triplets ran ahead, chasing pigeons, laughing at nothing. And that's when it happened. Cassian Roe stepped out of a restaurant 2 blocks away. Phone pressed his ear, already moving toward his car. He glanced up and froze. Zuri stood across the street, holding the hand of a small boy while 2 identical girls ran circles around her, their laughter bright and careless. Cassian's brain stuttered, tried to process, rejected what he was seeing, then accepted it. Her, and them. 3 children. His children. Zuri felt the weight of his stare before she saw him. She looked up. Their eyes met across the street. For one terrible second, the world stopped. Then Zuri turned, scooped up her son, grabbed her daughter's hands, and walked in the opposite direction without looking back. Cassian stood on the sidewalk, phone forgotten, watching them disappear into the crowd. His mind raced. Questions collided. Calculations formed. She'd kept them, all of them, and she'd hidden them for 2 years. He pulled out his phone, scrolled to a contact he hadn't used in months. Silas Kane answered on the first ring. Cassian's voice was calm, controlled. Find her. That night, Zuri triple-locked her apartment door, checked every window, and sat on the couch with her phone in her lap, waiting for something she couldn't name. Kess called. Did something happen? Zuri closed her eyes. He saw us. Silence. Then Kess's voice, sharp and urgent. Pack a bag. Now. Kess. He's not going to let this go, Z. You know that. So pack. And be ready to move. Zuri hung up, looked at her sleeping children, at the life she'd fought so hard to build. And she knew the storm was coming back. Would you run again? Or would you finally make him face what he tried to erase? When power feels threatened, it doesn't negotiate, it consumes. Cassian Roe sat in his penthouse office, city lights bleeding through the glass like exposed wounds. He hadn't slept, couldn't. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw them. 3 children, his children, walking through a park like they'd never been erased. The audacity of it burned through him. Not anger exactly, but something sharper. Control slipping. Legacy unraveling. Questions he couldn't answer stacking up like accusations. Why hadn't she come back for money? Why hadn't she leveraged them? Why had she hidden them for 2 years? And the question that haunted him most, what did she want now? Silas Kane stood near the window, silent, waiting. He'd been here for an hour. Cassian had briefed him with clinical precision. Names, dates, the park sighting, everything. Find her, Cassian had said. Find out where she lives, where she works, who she talks to. I need to know if this is leverage or something else. Silas nodded once. And when I find her, Cassian hesitated. The old instinct, bury it, erase it, make it disappear, rose fast. But this wasn't a scandal anymore. This was blood. His blood. Document everything. But don't touch her. Not yet. Silas left without another word. Zuri felt the surveillance before she saw proof. It started small. A car that appeared 3 mornings in a row outside the Triplets daycare. Same make. Same tinted windows. Different parking spots. Then, at the grocery store, a man in a gray jacket lingered near the cereal aisle, pretending to read labels while Zuri loaded her cart. She tested him, turned abruptly down a different aisle. He followed. Zuri abandoned her cart, grabbed her children, and left through the back entrance. That night, An unmarked envelope appeared under her door. No posti, no return address, just a single photograph inside. Her, the triplets, taken from across the street 2 days ago. Zuri's hands shook as she stared at the image. The message was clear. We see you. We know where you are. We can get close anytime we want. She called Kess immediately. He's escalating, Zuri said, voice tight. This isn't surveillance anymore. This is intimidation. Kess's response was immediate. You need a lawyer. Now. I can't afford. I don't care what you can afford. You need someone who can fight back legally before he makes this worse. 2 days later, Zuri sat across from Dante Mero in a cramped office that smelled like old coffee and paper. Dante was younger than she'd expected. Mid-30s, sharp eyes, sleeves rolled up, no pretense. He listened without interrupting while Zuri laid out everything. The check, the disappearance, the surveillance, the photo. When she finished, Dante leaned back and exhaled slowly. He's building a case. For what? Custody, paternity, control. Dante tapped his pen against the desk. Men like Cassian Roe don't just want access. They want ownership. He's documenting your life to prove you're unstable, unfit, or hiding something. Zuri's stomach twisted. She'd feared this, prepared for it, but hearing it confirmed felt like standing on the edge of a cliff. What do I do? Dante met her eyes. You document everything too. Every encounter, every thread, every photograph, and you stop running. Stop running. He wants you scared, reactive, easy to corner. Dante leaned forward. So we flip the script. We gather evidence of harassment, coercion, and intimidation. And when he makes his move, we're ready. Zuri stared at him. For 2 years, she'd survived by staying invisible. Now Dante was asking her to step into the light and fight. The idea terrified her, but so did running forever. Over the next 2 weeks, the pressure intensified. Zuri's landlord received an anonymous complaint about noise violations. The daycare received a call questioning her payment history. A client canceled their contract without explanation. Each incident was small, deniable, but together they formed a pattern. Dante documented everything. Timestamps, screenshots, witness statements. He's trying to destabilize you, Dante explained. Make you desperate enough to negotiate on his terms. It's working, Zuri admitted. Good. Let him think that. Dante pulled out a folder. Because while he's playing intimidation games, we're building a case for harassment and coercion. The more he pushes, the stronger our defense becomes. Then came the incident that changed everything. Zuri was walking the triplets home from daycare when she noticed the stroller felt off balance. She stopped, checked the wheels. The front left wheel was loose. Not worn loose, like someone had tampered with the bolt. Zuri's blood turned to ice. If the wheel had come off mid-walk, if the stroller had tipped into traffic, she didn't finish the thought. She took the stroller straight to Dante's office. He examined it, took photos, and called a mechanic who confirmed the bolt had been deliberately loosened. Dante's face darkened. This isn't harassment anymore. This is endangerment. What do we do? Zuri asked, voice shaking. We file for a restraining order, and we make sure Cassian knows that if anything happens to you or those kids, we have evidence pointing directly at him. 3 days later, a legal notice arrived at Cassian's office. Restraining order, harassment charges, documentation of surveillance, intimidation, and potential endangerment. Cassian read it twice, then called Silas. Did you touch the stroller? No. Did anyone on your team? No. We were told surveillance only. Cassian hung up, stared at the notice, realized two things simultaneously. First, Zuri wasn't hiding anymore. She was fighting. Second, someone else was involved, and they were willing to cross lines even he wouldn't. The hunt had just become a war. When power meets resistance, who breaks first? Comment your prediction. Sometimes the battlefield isn't private. It's public, and the witnesses matter more than the fight. The restaurant on 10th Street was the kind of place where power dined quietly. Crystal chandeliers, white tablecloths, conversations conducted in low tones that could move markets or ruin lives. Cassian Roe sat at the center table, surrounded by investors, board members, and strategists who controlled billions. Tonight was critical, a merger deal that would cement his legacy as untouchable. He smiled, shook hands, ordered wine, played the role he'd perfected, brilliant, composed, inevitable. Then the door opened. Zuri Kade stepped inside. She wore a simple black dress, hair pulled back, no queuity. She looked calm, purposeful, unshakable. Behind her, Kess held the hands of three small children, two girls in matching yellow dresses, one boy in a tiny button-up shirt. Their curls caught the light. Their laughter filled the quiet space like bells breaking silence. The restaurant's noise didn't stop, but it shifted. Heads turned. Whispers started. Cassian's entire body locked. His investor, mid-sentence, noticed the reaction, followed Cassian's gaze, saw the woman and children approaching. Cassian? Everything all right? Cassian forced his face into something neutral, but his hands gripped the table edge, knuckles white. Zuri didn't stop at the hostess stand. She walked straight toward his table, her children trailing behind like proof incarnate. The room watched. Cassian stood abruptly, tried to intercept her before she reached the table. But Zuri stopped 3 feet away, close enough to be heard, far enough to avoid being touched. Cassian, she said quietly. Her voice didn't waver. We need to talk. His jaw tightened. He glanced at the investors, all watching now, curious, confused, calculating. This isn't the time, he said through clenched teeth. It never is. Zuri's eyes didn't leave his. But since you've been watching me for weeks, following my children, tampering with their safety, I figured it was time we had this conversation in public. The table went silent. One of the board members leaned forward, eyes narrowing. Cassian's voice dropped to a harsh whisper. You're making a scene? No, Storytime calmly. You made a scene 2 years ago when you told me to erase my pregnancy. I'm just correcting the record. A woman at a nearby table pulled out her phone. Cassian saw it. His chest tightened. Let's talk privately, he said quickly. Why? So you can threaten me again? Zuri shook her head. No. Whatever you have to say, you can say it here, in front of witnesses. Cassian glanced at his investors. Their expressions had shifted from curiosity to concern. This wasn't the controlled narrative he'd spent years building. This was exposure. He lowered his voice, trying to sound reasonable. Zuri, I don't know what you think you're doing. I know exactly what I'm doing. Zuri stepped closer. You wanted to know where your children are? Here they are. You want to control? You lost at the moment you tried to erase us. One of the triplets, the boy, tugged on Kess's hand and pointed at Cassian. Who's that man? He asked loudly. The question hung in the air like a verdict. Cassian's face drained of color. Zuri knelt down, looked her son in the eyes, and said gently but clearly, That's the man who didn't want you to be born. The room erupted in whispers. Cassian's investor stood abruptly. Another checked his phone. The woman recording shifted angles. Cassian's voice turned cold. You have no idea what you've just done. Actually, I do. Zuri stood, calm and unwavering. I have evidence of your surveillance, your harassment, the tampered stroller, the threats. My lawyer has it all. So here's how this works. You stop. You accept legal accountability. You stay away from me and my children unless a court says otherwise. Or, Cassian challenged. Zuri gestured to the woman recording. Or this conversation and every document I have goes public tonight, and your investors can decide if they want to keep backing a man who endangers children. Cassian stared at her. For the first time in years, he had no leverage, no control, no exit strategy. The restaurant had become a cage, and everyone was watching. One of the investors cleared his throat. Cassian, perhaps we should reschedule this discussion. It wasn't a suggestion. It was damage control. Cassian's empire, built on image and intimidation, was cracking in real time. Zuri turned to leave. Kess guided the children toward the door. But before they exited, Zuri looked back one last time. You had a choice 2 years ago, Cassian. You made it. Now you live with the consequences. She walked out, and the restaurant, the investors, the strangers, the woman still recording, watched Cassian Roe sit back down at a table that suddenly felt empty. The merger conversation didn't resume. Would you have walked away quietly or confronted him like Zuri did? Desperation doesn't wear a suit well, but it tries. By morning, the video had been viewed 40,000 times. The woman in the restaurant had posted it with a caption that spread like fire. Billionaire CEO confronted by mother of his triplets. Says he told her to get rid of them. Who is this man? Comments flooded in. Outrage. Disgust. Speculation. Cassian's company was tagged hundreds of times. News outlets picked it up. The board started calling. Cassian sat in his office, phone ringing nonstop, and felt something he hadn't experienced in 20 years. Fear, not of losing money. He had enough. Not of lawsuits. He had lawyers. Fear that the one thing he'd built his entire identity around, control, was gone. Silas entered without knocking. Damage control options are limited, Silas said flatly. The video's viral. Deny it makes you look worse. Apologizing admits guilt. What do you suggest? Cassian's voice was tight. Pivot. Frame this as a custody dispute. Say you've been trying to connect with your children, but she blocked you. Make her the villain. Cassian stared at the city below. The same view that used to remind him of his power now felt like looking down from a ledge. Will it work? Only if you move fast. File for paternity and custody today. Make it look like you're the one seeking justice. Cassian nodded slowly. The old instinct returned when cornered attack. Do it. Zuri received the legal papers 2 days later. Paternity test demand. Custody petition. A motion claiming she had unlawfully withheld his children and damaged his parental rights. The language was clean, professional, designed to make Cassian look like a victim. Zuri's hands shook as she read it. Dante sat across from her, reading his own copy, jaw tight. This is retaliation, Dante said. He's trying to flip the narrative before the harassment charges stick. Can he win? Zuri asked, voice barely above a whisper. In court? No. We have evidence. We have witnesses. We have his own words on video. Dante paused. But custody battles aren't just about evidence. They're about resources. And he has more than you. Zuri felt the walls closing in. She'd thought confronting Cassian publicly would end this. Instead, she'd escalated it into something bigger. What happens now? She asked. We file a counter motion. We use the harassment evidence to prove he's not fit for custody. And we prepare for a fight. Dante met her eyes. This won't be quick. And it won't be easy. Zuri looked at the papers again. At the legal language that tried to rewrite history. At the signature at the bottom. Cassian's, bold and unapologetic. She thought about her children. About the life she'd built in hiding. About the choice she'd made 2 years ago to refuse the check and walk away. And she realized something. She wasn't the same woman who'd stood in that penthouse. That woman had been alone. Scared. Unsure. This woman had survived. Built. Fought back. Filed a counter motion, Zuri said firmly. And let's make sure the court sees exactly who Cassian Roe is. The legal battle moved fast. Cassian's team filed motions claiming Zuri was unstable, financially insecure, and deliberately hiding his children to punish him. Dante countered with evidence of harassment, surveillance, the tampered stroller, and a timeline proving Cassian had made no attempt to contact Zuri until he saw her publicly. The media coverage intensified. Op-eds debated parental rights versus child safety. Social media split into camps. Cassian's company's stock dipped. But through it all, Cassian refused to back down. He hired expert witnesses, character references, PR consultants who rebranded him as a father fighting for his rights. And slowly, the narrative began to shift. Then came the deposition. Justice doesn't always look like victory, but it always looks like truth. The courtroom was smaller than Zuri had imagined. No dramatic balconies. No packed gallery. Just fluorescent lights, wooden benches, and a judge who looked tired before the hearing even started. Zuri sat beside Dante, hands folded in her lap, trying to keep her breathing steady. Across the aisle, Cassian sat flanked by 3 lawyers in expensive suits. He didn't look at her. The judge reviewed the case file in silence. Minutes stretched like hours. Finally, she looked up. I've reviewed the evidence, the depositions, the harassment documentation, and the viral video that, frankly, shouldn't exist, but does. The judge's voice was flat, professional, unimpressed. Mr. Roe, I'm going to be direct. Your petition for custody is denied. Cassian's lawyer stood immediately. Objected. Cited precedent. The judge raised a hand. Counselor, your client admitted on record that his primary motivation is control, not the welfare of these children. He offered money to terminate the pregnancy. He deployed surveillance and intimidation tactics. And when confronted publicly, he escalated. She paused. That's not the behavior of father. That's the behavior of someone protecting an image. Cassian's face went pale. The judge continued. Ms. Kade has demonstrated stability, commitment, and genuine concern for her children's welfare. The restraining order will remain in place. Mr. Roe will have no contact with the children or Ms. Kade unless this court grants supervised visitation, which will not be considered for a minimum of 18 months. 18 months. Cassian's voice cracked. That's the minimum. If you want visitation rights after that, you'll need to complete a parenting program, undergo psychological evaluation, and demonstrate sustained behavioral change. Any violation of the restraining order resets the clock. The judge's eyes were steel. Do you understand? Cassian nodded slowly. His lawyers whispered urgently, but he waved them off. The judge turned to Zuri. Ms. Kade, this court recognizes the difficulty of your situation. You're granted full legal and physical custody. Child support will be determined in a separate proceeding. But I want to be clear. If Mr. Roe completes the requirements and demonstrates genuine change, supervised visitation may be reconsidered. That decision will be based on the best interests of the children, not on punishment. Zuri nodded, tears streaming down her face. Court adjourned. The gavel struck. The sound echoed. It was over. Outside the courthouse, Kess waited with the triplets. They were playing with sidewalk chalk, oblivious to the battle that had just concluded inside. Zuri knelt down, pulled them into a hug, and let herself cry for the first time in weeks. Relief, exhaustion, gratitude, fear finally releasing its grip. Dante stood nearby, arms crossed, smiling quietly. "You did it. We did it," Zuri corrected. Kess grinned. "Now what?" Zuri looked at her children. Safe, loved, hers. "Now we live." Across town, Cassian sat alone in his penthouse office, staring at the city he'd once felt he owned. The board had issued a statement distancing the company from his personal matters. 2 investors pulled out. His lawyers were already discussing appeal options he knew wouldn't work. But none of that mattered. What mattered was the image burned into his mind. 3 small faces he'd never held, never met, never chosen, and the realization, sharp and undeniable, that he'd lost something he couldn't buy back. He pulled out his phone, opened a file Silas had sent months ago, photos from the surveillance. Zuri laughing with the triplets in a park, helping them climb playground equipment, reading to them on a bench. In every photo, she looked exhausted, but she also looked whole. Cassian closed the file. For the first time in 2 years, he didn't try to calculate his next move. He just sat in silence, staring at the skyline, and let himself feel what he'd been running from since the moment Zuri walked out of his office. Regret. 18 months later, Zuri stood in her apartment, bigger now, brighter, filled with toys and laughter and the chaos of 3 almost 4-year-olds learning to share space. She'd rebuilt again, not from survival this time, but from strength. Her freelance business had grown. She hired help, taken weekends off, let herself breathe. And the triplets? They thrived. Loud, curious, fearless. One afternoon, Dante called. Cassian completed the parenting program, passed the psych eval. His lawyer filed for supervised visitation. Zuri's chest tightened. She'd known this was coming, but knowing didn't make it easier. "What do you think?" she asked. "Honestly, he's different." The evaluator noted genuine remorse and behavioral change. "But your call, Zuri. You're their mother. You decide what's safe." Zuri looked at her children playing in the living room, at the life she'd protected with everything she had. She thought about Cassian, not the man who'd slid a check across the desk, but the man who'd spent 18 months trying to become someone different. Change was possible, but it had to be earned, proven, sustained. "Tell his lawyer we'll consider supervised visitation," Zuri said slowly. "But it starts slow. 1 hour, in a neutral space, with supervision. And if he shows up late, cancels, or tries to manipulate, it's done." Dante smiled. "I'll make it official." Zuri hung up, stared at the window, at the city beyond. She didn't know if Cassian would follow through. Didn't know if redemption was real or just another performance. But she knew one thing for certain. Her children were safe, loved, protected, and no one, not Cassian, not money, not power, could take that away. Across the city, Cassian received the email from his lawyer. Supervised visitation approved. 1 hour. Neutral location. Strict conditions. He read it 3 times. Then he did something he hadn't done in years. He called his therapist, asked what to bring to a first meeting with children who didn't know him. how to introduce himself, what to say. He didn't know if he deserved this chance, but he knew, finally, that earning it would take more than money. It would take time, humility, and proof that he'd become the father he'd refused to be. Would you forgive him after he proved change? Comment, forgive or no chance. This is the end of their story, but it's the beginning of something harder. Accountability, healing, and the truth that love isn't owed, it's earned. If this story moved you, share it. Someone out there needs to know you can walk away from people who try to erase you. You can rebuild. You can win. And sometimes justice doesn't look like revenge. It looks like peace.